If you're drawn to stories of courage that transcend time, hit subscribe because this channel brings ancient wisdom into modern life. She stood at the gates with bleeding feet, her hair once arranged in the elaborate style of royalty now shorn close to her skull, her silk robes traded for coarse yellow cloth. Behind her, 500 women in the same condition, dust-covered and exhausted from a journey that should have broken them. They had walked over 300 miles on bare feet, through wilderness and scorching sun, and still, the Buddha said no. This was the third time Mahapajapati Gotami heard that word, the third refusal. But here is the paradox. The man who refused her was the child she had raised as her own, the nephew she had nursed at her breast when his mother died 7 days after his birth, the prince she had protected, educated, and loved unconditionally for 29 years before he left the palace to find enlightenment. Now he was the Buddha, and she was asking for something that had never existed in human history, a legitimate spiritual path for women, not as supporters, not as devotees, but as fully ordained monastics with the same goal as men: liberation. What happened next would determine the fate of half of humanity's access to the Dharma. The sister who became a mother, Devadaha, a small kingdom nestled in the Himalayan foothills, was where two sisters were born to King Buddha of the Kolya clan. The elder sister was Maya, the younger was named Gotami, later to be called Mahapajapati, meaning great leader of the assembly. At their births, court astrologers examined the distinctive bodily marks on both girls and made a prophecy. Any son born to either sister would become a universal monarch. It was a prediction that would bind their destinies to the future Buddha. Both sisters married King Suddhodana of the Sakya clan. Maya became the chief queen. Gotami became the second queen. The arrangement was common for the time, a political alliance between two neighboring kingdoms. But what seemed like a conventional royal marriage would soon transform into something far more significant. Maya gave birth to Prince Siddhartha on the full moon of May. The birth was auspicious, marked by 32 distinctive signs. But 7 days later, Maya died, a tragedy that would have left the newborn prince motherless had it not been for Gotami. 3 days after Siddhartha's birth, Gotami had given birth to her own son, Nanda. But when her sister died, Gotami made a decision that defined her character. She gave her own infant son to wet nurses and personally nursed Siddhartha, not out of duty, but out of love. She raised him as if he were her own flesh and blood, devoting herself completely to his upbringing. The prince would later remember this unconditional care. He would remember the woman who sacrificed for him when he had no one else. For 29 years, Gotami watched the prince grow. She taught him, protected him, worried over him like any mother would. She was there through his education, his marriage to Yasodhara, the birth of his son Rahula. She witnessed his growing discontentment with palace life, his questions about suffering, aging, and death. Then one night, he left. Siddhartha abandoned the palace, his wife, his newborn son, his kingdom, everything, to find a solution to human suffering. Gotami understood why he left, even as it broke her heart. 6 years later, news reached Kapilavatthu that Siddhartha had achieved enlightenment. He had become the Buddha, the awakened one. When he returned to his homeland in the 5th year after his enlightenment, Gotami was among those who listened to his teachings. During a discourse on the Dharma, something shifted inside her. The truths he spoke about impermanence, suffering, and non-self resonated at a depth she had never experienced. Right there, listening to the son she had raised, Gotami attained the first stage of enlightenment, stream entry. She was no longer an ordinary person. The path to liberation had opened, but stream entry wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted full liberation. The widow's resolve. 5 years after the Buddha's enlightenment, King Suddhodana lay dying. The Buddha returned to Kapilavatthu and taught his father the Dhamma. Suddhodana, who had already achieved the stage of non-returner, listened with perfect clarity. As he took his final breaths beneath the regal white umbrella in the court of his kingdom, he attained full arahantship, complete liberation. He died the same day, utterly freed from the cycle of birth and death. For Gotami, widowhood meant freedom, no longer bound by royal duties, no longer responsible for managing a kingdom. She stood at a crossroads. She was now free to dedicate herself fully to what mattered most, the pursuit of awakening. The path was clear. Her son Nanda had already joined the Buddha's monastic order. Her grandson Rahula, though only a child, had been ordained as a novice. The 500 wives of the Sakyan princes who had become monks after hearing the Buddha preach the Mahasamaya Sutta were also contemplating renunciation. They all looked to Gotami. If anyone could convince the Buddha to establish an order for women, it would be her. She approached the Buddha at Kapilavatthu and made her request. Lord, please allow women to renounce the household life and enter the homeless state under the Dharma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata. The Buddha's response was immediate and firm. Enough, Gotami. Do not ask for women to go forth from home to homelessness in the Dharma and discipline. She asked again. He refused. She asked a third time. He refused again and departed for Vesali, a city over 300 miles away. For most people, 3 refusals from the Buddha would have been the end, but Gotami was not most people. She had raised this man. She knew his heart, and she understood something profound. The Buddha had not given her reasons for his refusal. He had simply said no. That meant the door wasn't closed. It was simply not yet open. The march that changed history Gotami summoned a barber. She had her long hair groomed daily by palace servants, her entire life cut off completely. She took the saffron robes traditionally worn by renunciants and donned them. Then she sent word to the 500 Sakyan women. They did the same. In yellow robes, with shaven heads, looking like monks, but without ordination, 500 women left Kapilavatthu. They left behind wealth, comfort, status, security. They left behind everything society told them defined their worth. And they walked, on foot, through wilderness paths, through heat and dust, 357 miles from Kapilavatthu to Vesali. Various chieftains and local rulers offered them chariots. They refused. This was not a casual journey. It was a pilgrimage of determination. Their bleeding feet were their offering. Their exhaustion was their devotion. News of their march spread like fire through the countryside. Crowds lined the routes to watch this unprecedented sight. Royal women walking like ascetics, refusing the comfort their status entitled them to. By the time they reached Vesali, their feet were swollen and torn. Their faces were covered in dust. They were completely exhausted, but they had arrived. Gotami stood at the entrance of Mahavana monastery where the Buddha was staying. She knew the situation was delicate. If she approached the Buddha directly and faced another refusal in her current state, it would be humiliating not just for her but for all 500 women. She needed an intermediary. She needed someone who understood compassion. That's when Ananda appeared. The Buddha's cousin and attendant, Ananda, was known for his empathy and his ability to intercede on behalf of others. He saw the women at the monastery gates weary, determined, desperate, and immediately felt compassion. He approached Gotami and asked what had happened. She explained everything: the 3 refusals, the journey, the longing for liberation. Ananda promised to help. The questions that changed everything. Ananda approached the Buddha that evening. He described what he had seen: the women's condition, their determination, their suffering. Then he asked a question that would become historically pivotal. Lord, are women capable of realizing the various stages of sainthood as nuns? Can they attain stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and arahantship? The Buddha's answer was unequivocal. They are capable, Ananda. This was the critical moment. The Buddha had just confirmed that women possessed the same spiritual capacity as men. The biological and cultural barriers that had kept women from ordained spiritual life were not based on actual capability. Women could achieve the highest fruits of the path. Ananda pressed forward. If that is so, Lord, and considering that Mahapajapati Gotami was of great service to the Blessed One, she was your aunt, your foster mother, your nurse who gave you milk when your mother died. Would it not be good for women to go forth from the household life into homelessness in the Dharma and discipline? The Buddha paused. Then he spoke the words that would establish the Bhikkhunī order. If Mahapajapati Gotami will accept 8 conditions of respect, let that be reckoned as her full ordination. 8 conditions, 8 rules that would structure the relationship between monks and nuns. Later scholars would debate these rules intensely, questioning whether they truly came from the Buddha or were added later by monastic communities adjusting to cultural pressures. The rules included provisions like, a nun ordained for 100 years must show respect to a monk ordained even that day. Nuns must seek guidance from monks. Nuns cannot spend the rains retreat where there are no monks. From a modern perspective, these rules seem to subordinate women, but in the context of 5th century BCE India, where women had virtually no religious authority, where female renunciants were unheard of, where even basic education for women was rare, these rules were revolutionary. They established that women could be ordained, that women could pursue liberation, that women had the same ultimate goal as men. Ananda brought the conditions to Gotami. She listened carefully. Then she said, Lord, just as a woman or man, young and fond of adornment, having bathed and received a garland of lotuses or jasmine or roses, would take it in both hands and place it on the head, even so do I accept these 8 conditions, not to be transgressed for as long as I live. With those words, Mahapajapati Gotami became the first bhikkhuni in history. The 500 Sakyan women were ordained immediately after. The door had opened. Women could now walk the path to Nibbana as ordained monastics. The training and attainment ordination was just the beginning. Gotami approached the Buddha after the ceremony and paid homage. The Buddha, seeing her readiness, taught her a meditation technique. The instruction was practical and direct, focused on developing insight into the nature of reality. He taught her to discern what leads to dispassion, detachment, cessation, calm, higher knowledge, enlightenment, and nibbana, to distinguish between teachings and practices that increase craving versus those that lead to freedom, to understand the difference between what binds us to suffering and what liberates us from it. Gotami took these instructions and practiced with intensity. She was already a stream enterer. She had already seen through the illusion of permanent self. Now she deepened her practice, examining the nature of all phenomena, seeing their arising and passing, their impermanence, their inability to provide lasting satisfaction, their empty nature. Not long after beginning her intensive practice, Mahapajapati Gotami attained full arahantship. She had completely extinguished craving, aversion, and delusion. She was utterly liberated. At the age where most people would be preparing for death, she had achieved what few humans ever accomplish: complete freedom from suffering. The 500 women who had walked with her from Kapilavatthu also attained arahantship. They achieved this after listening to a discourse given by the monk Nandaka, who the Buddha had assigned to teach them. 500 women, from royal backgrounds, all achieving complete liberation together. It was unprecedented. The Buddha later declared Mahapajapati Gotami as foremost among the bhikkhunis, who were senior, the most experienced, the one who understood the path earliest among all ordained women. This wasn't just an honorary title, it was recognition of her actual attainment and her role as the founder of the woman's monastic order. Years of service and teaching, Gotami didn't retreat into solitary practice after achieving arahantship. She spent the following decades teaching, guiding hundreds of women who joined the Bhikkhunī Sangha, establishing training protocols, helping women from all social classes, not just royalty, understand the Dharma and realize liberation. She became a living example of what was possible. When people doubted whether women could achieve the same spiritual heights as men, they only had to look at Gotami and the hundreds of women she had trained. She embodied the proof, the Therigatha, the collection of verses composed by enlightened bhikkhunis, preserves some of her words. They're marked by deep understanding of impermanence, by freedom from fear, by complete peace. One verse records her saying, "All suffering is understood, the cause, the craving, is dried up, the noble eightfold way unfolds. I have reached the state where everything stops." These weren't theoretical statements, they were descriptions of her direct experience. She had walked the entire path. She had seen the end of suffering in her own mind and body. When Gotami was 120 years old, she resided at a bhikkhuni monastery in Vesali. The Buddha was staying at Mahavana monastery nearby. One morning, after her alms round and meal, she entered into a deep meditation. During that meditation, she became aware that the Buddha himself would soon pass into final nibbana. She knew his time was approaching, and she made a decision. She would not remain in the world after the Buddha passed away. She would enter parinibbana first. The earth trembled when she formed this resolution. Thunder roared across the sky. The guardian spirits of the monastery began to wail, knowing what was coming. The same thought arose independently in the minds of the 500 arahant bhikkhunis who had been her original companions. They had gone forth together, practiced together, achieved realization together. Now they would leave together. Gotami informed the Buddha of her intention. Initially, there was resistance not from the Buddha, but from the monastic community. The thought of losing Mahapajapati, the founder of the women's order, was overwhelming. But she was resolute. The Buddha made one request before granting his permission. He asked her to demonstrate her spiritual powers publicly. There were still those who doubted women's capacity for full realization. He wanted Gotami to leave no doubt in anyone's mind. She agreed. Before an assembly of monks, nuns, and lay people, Mahapajapati Gotami performed miraculous displays. She levitated. She produced fire and water from her body simultaneously. She multiplied her form. She demonstrated complete mastery over the elements, not to show off, but to prove definitively that women could achieve everything men could achieve on the spiritual path. The demonstrations weren't about ego. They were about legacy. She wanted future generations of women to know what was possible. After the demonstrations, she approached the Buddha one final time. She touched her face to his feet, an unusual gesture, granted only in this exceptional moment, and asked forgiveness for any fault in how she had entered monastic life or instructed her fellow bhikkhunis. The Buddha replied that there was nothing to forgive. She had been faultless. The 500 bhikkhunis then paid their respects. Gotami spoke her final words to the Buddha. "My eyes and ears could never see or hear enough of you, but now, quenched in the Dharma, they are satiated." She returned to her monastery with her companions. They entered deep meditation, passing progressively through the jhanas, the absorption states. Then, at the deepest level of meditative concentration, they released their life force. One by one, Mahapajapati Gotami and the 500 bhikkhunis passed into final nibbana. They died together, just as they had lived and practiced together. The cremation ceremony that followed was extraordinary. The Buddha himself attended something he had stipulated should never happen: that monks should not attend nuns' funerals even if the nun was sick or dying. But for Gotami, he made an exception. He changed the rule he had established. Even in death, she was breaking barriers. Monks like Sariputta officiated. The pyres were made of fragrant sandalwood. When the fires died down and only bones and relics remained, Ananda placed Gotami's cremated remains in her alms bowl and handed them to the Buddha. The Buddha held the bowl and spoke verses about impermanence, about the falling of mighty trees, about the inevitability of death. For even the most virtuous, the Lichavi princes built a stupa to house her relics. It stood as a monument to the woman who had made it possible for half of humanity to pursue complete liberation. So what does this mean for us today? The story of Mahapajapati Gotami isn't just ancient history. It's a teaching about persistence, about seeing through social conditioning, about refusing to accept limitations that have no basis in reality. First, spiritual capacity has nothing to do with gender, race, or social class. The Buddha confirmed this explicitly when Ananda asked if women could achieve the fruits of the path. The answer was yes. Without qualification, without exception. This wasn't political correctness, it was acknowledgement of a fundamental truth. Liberation is available to anyone willing to do the work. The barriers are cultural, not metaphysical. In our time, we still encounter versions of this prejudice. People are told they can't achieve certain things because of their gender, their background, their age, their education level. Gotami's story challenges every such limitation. If a woman in 5th century BCE India, when women had virtually no rights, no education, no religious authority, could achieve complete enlightenment, then what's your excuse? What limitations are you accepting that aren't actually real? Second, persistence in pursuit of truth is not the same as stubbornness. Gotami heard no 3 times. She walked 300 miles on bleeding feet. She stood at monastery gates exhausted and dust-covered, but she never gave up. Why? Because she wasn't seeking personal gain. She wasn't pursuing status or power. She was seeking liberation for herself and for all women. When your motivation is genuine, when you're pursuing something that will benefit not just you, but countless others, persistence becomes a virtue. This is different from ego-driven stubbornness. Gotami wasn't offended by the Buddha's refusals. She didn't take them personally. She simply kept presenting the truth. Women are capable. Women deserve this opportunity. The path should be open to all. That clarity of purpose, that lack of self-concern made her persistence powerful rather than annoying. Third, sometimes the greatest service requires sacrifice. Gotami gave her own infant son to nurses so she could nurse Siddhartha. She walked 300 miles at an age when most people would be resting. She accepted 8 additional rules that monks didn't have to follow. She accepted conditions that, from one perspective, seemed unfair, But she understood something crucial. If she waited for perfect conditions, if she demanded complete equality before taking a single step, the door would never open. She accepted the compromise that was possible in her time and culture, knowing that future generations could build on what she established. And they did. The Bhikkhunī lineage, once established, spread throughout the Buddhist world. Thousands of women achieved liberation because Gotami was willing to accept less than perfect conditions to establish the path. This isn't about accepting oppression. It's about strategic thinking, about understanding that progress often comes incrementally, about being willing to be the one who opens a door that you yourself might not fully benefit from, so others can walk through it more easily. Here's how you can practice this. First, examine your unquestioned limitations. Take a piece of paper. Write down all the things you believe you can't do or can't achieve. Then next to each one, write, is this a real limitation or a socially constructed one? Be honest. Many of the barriers we face exist only in our minds or in outdated cultural beliefs. Gotami's story teaches us to question every limitation before accepting it. Second, develop persistent right effort. This doesn't mean being stubborn. It means clarifying your deepest motivation and then refusing to abandon it when you face obstacles. Ask yourself, what am I pursuing that would benefit not just me but others? What truth am I trying to embody? Then commit to that with the same persistence Gotami showed. When you hear no, ask what would make the answer yes. When you face a closed door, walk around and find another entrance. When you're exhausted, rest and then continue. Third, practice meditation on equality. Sit quietly, breathe naturally, then bring to mind someone you consider spiritually superior to yourself, maybe a teacher, a monk, a realized being. Now recognize they achieved what they achieved because they practiced, not because they were born special, not because they had supernatural powers from the beginning. They were once as confused and suffering as you are now. The path they walked is the same path available to you. Feel that truth. Let it sink in. You have the same basic potential they had. What's required is practice, not privilege. Fourth, accept strategic compromises without abandoning principles. This is nuanced. Gotami accepted the 8 Garudhammas rules that placed nuns in a subordinate position to monks because accepting them opened the door for women to become ordained. She didn't agree with the unfairness, but she understood that working within the system as it existed was the only way to change it from the inside. Ask yourself, where in my life am I refusing to take any step because I can't take the perfect step? Where could I make a strategic compromise that doesn't violate my core principles but does move me forward? Fifth, mentor others once you've achieved something. Gotami didn't just achieve her own liberation and retire. She spent decades teaching. She established training protocols. She helped hundreds of women understand the path. Once you overcome a barrier, once you achieve something significant, turn around and help others do the same. That's how movements grow. That's how real change happens. One person opens the door, then holds it open for everyone else. Mahapajapati Gotami died at 120 years old, surrounded by 500 enlightened women she had trained. The Buddha himself attended her funeral, breaking his own rule to honor her. Her relics were enshrined in a stupa that became a pilgrimage site for generations. But her real legacy isn't the stupa. It's the thousands of women who have walked the path to liberation because she refused to accept no as the final answer. It's every woman who has achieved enlightenment in the 25 centuries since she stood at monastery gates with bleeding feet. It's the principle she established and proved. Spiritual awakening is available to everyone, regardless of gender, background, or circumstance. If this story challenged you or inspired you, subscribe to this channel. We're exploring the lived wisdom of Buddhist masters, not as abstract philosophy, but as practical guides for your own transformation. Here is a question to carry with you. What door are you standing in front of right now, believing it's closed, when actually it's just waiting for you to push harder? What would it take for you to develop Gotami's persistence? What truth about your own capacity have you been refusing to accept? The path is open. It always has been. The question is, will you walk it?